welcome to the Bible class of Jews for Jesus with Bob Mendelson.
1 Corinthians chapter 10. Wow, this is one of those chapters where there are a lot of allusions to Older Testament stuff. And the Corinthians, who are a mixed bag of folk, Jew and non-Jew, in the same community of faith, the Jewish guys would have said, I know that one. And the Gentiles would say, could you explain that to me? They had a lot of learning to do because these are from the book of Exodus and the book of Numbers, which we would have been reading every week in Shul, but they wouldn't have been. Sosthenes, who's co-writing this letter with all, was a leader in the synagogue, and maybe this is his section that he wrote. But whatever the case, there are some warnings here of how not to live. There's a method of doing it, and then there's the rationale to which he comes back, which he's hitting almost every chapter, the last several chapters, about this eating and drinking thing. So let's go back to verse 1 and see that Paul and Sosthenes want us all to understand what happened back in the wilderness. The Jewish people constantly allude to the wilderness. This is 1,500 years after the case. Remember, he's writing about 5560 CE. The wilderness means 1490 BCE to 1450. That's when we escape. That's the Exodus, around 1500 BC. So it is still as if it just happened. It's sort of like saying, well, Captain Cook arrived to Australia, which, by the way, last night, just FYI, my wife Patty, my daughter Anne, and I all became citizens. Australia. Last night. Mazel tov. But common history makes for common people. That is, people hold things in common. If I talk to you about the history of Burma, you'd say, yeah, I don't know much about that. But if I talk about Sir Donald, most everybody would know what I'm talking about. If we talk about Ian Thorpe or Kathy Freeman, we've got common history. So we've got pop people, we've got less than pop people, Delta Goodrum. We've got people who are Australians and who therefore define us as a people somehow, some way. When we hear about famous Australians who've passed away, we all feel a bit of momentary, at least, remorse or sadness. And that's part of common culture. So now the apostle is saying that about us. Based on what happened to us 1,500 years before, let's go back and understand who we are. So he says in verse 1, I don't want you to be unaware that our fathers were all under the cloud, passed through the sea, baptized, here's an odd phrase, baptized into Moses. In the cloud and in the sea, all ate the same spiritual food, and all drank the same spiritual drink, the rock, and the rock was Messiah. So he's giving us these moments that we recognize from Jewish history.
What does it mean, baptizing?
Yeah, what does it mean?
They were interwoven into the Torah. And
kind of a networked in. Okay, other thoughts? So baptized into means became a follower of, enmeshed, and now he's leading, so I'm following. Okay.
Presumably they were on the floor of the ocean.
Yes.
Therefore, when the waters returned to normal, they'd been under, figuratively speaking, under the ocean, under the water. And Moses was all they knew at that point. They hadn't had the Lord at that point either.
Okay.
So in their mode of the time, I suppose it's the closest thing that we could get to their awe of this man Moses who had been called by God to lead them, teach them, and so on. Because there were lots of mixes. It wasn't uncommon to be baptized or mix it.
Yeah, but he's using one-off. It's a one-off symbol, and that's the one you described, the Red Sea.
I was going to say, up until the Red Sea, they were undergoing one kind of existence, and then beyond the Red Sea, they had to live another way. Like what we are doing when we are nursing, that you are putting an end to one kind of life, and you are then a new creation or living another way.
Good. So we've got a lot of pictures of what this means. When you're baptized physically into Moses, it means, and he's talking about the people of the day. He's not talking about Corinthians. He's talking about our fathers, a term that we use in the Psalms, several places. Exodus 14 and 15 is when they actually go through and walk through the sea, and the waters are like a wall, and then they rush back. He's talking about that one-off moment as the Jewish people went into the Red Sea, and the waters were held back. Remember, according to the rabbis, there were 12 lanes. one for each of the tribes. In the movies, it's just one big lane. But it does make sense to have 12, otherwise how would 3 million people get through quickly enough? And then that the waters rushed back over Pharaoh's army, and the cloud went behind us. Let's see if we can find that in the book of Exodus, chapter 14. Exodus 14, second book of the Bible, we see this. The people are complaining, saying, what are we supposed to do? Why did you bring us out of Egypt? Didn't we tell you to leave us alone? Moses said to the people in verse 13, 4 things. And he's rebuking 4 different noises from the Jewish people. Number 1, do not fear, because some were saying we're afraid, and let's go back and let's dive in. I mean, some were saying let's dive into the water. It's better to die there than to be caught by the Egyptians. He said, don't be afraid. Stand by and see the salvation of the Lord. Don't go anywhere. Don't dive in. The Egyptians whom you've seen today, you'll never see them again. Others were saying, let's go back. Let's go back and serve the Egyptians. Third rebuke is to those who said, let's fight those Egyptians. Verse 14, the Lord will fight for you. And the fourth rebuke is those who wanted to shout in almost tribal noise, maybe prayer. He said, while you keep silent. Those are the 4 rebukes that Moses gives in this section. But look then what God says. Why are you crying out to me? Tell the sons of Israel, go forward. You lift up your staff, stretch out your hand over the sea, and divide it. The sons of Israel will go through the midst of the sea on dry land. That's baptism into Moses, in the sea. As for me, behold, I will harden the hearts of the Egyptians so they won't go in after them. I'll be honored, God says. The Egyptians will know that I'm Yahweh when I am honored through Pharaoh. Verse 19, here's the other half of the verse. The angel of God, who had been going before the camp of Israel, moved and went behind them. And the pillar of cloud moved from before them and stood behind them. That's baptism in the cloud. So baptism in the water and in the cloud. So forward is the water, backward is the cloud. Does that make sense? That's what the apostle here is alluding to, the Exodus account, as the Jewish people walk in and out. And it's a little unusual to call it baptism, but it's clear if you understand what the word baptism means, to cause to dip. Bapto means to dip. The is in the middle means to cause. So to cause to dip is what a dunking does, sort of like what we do when we take a Bicky and stick it into our coffee. We baptize it. And that's what the Jewish people did. We were baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea. Both things happen. Immerse. To cause to dip is to immerse something. And it is a right thing to understand. That's what baptism is. So Paul is saying here, back in 1 Corinthians, that this baptism that the Jewish people had in and out through the cloud and sea is like the baptism that he's going to describe in a few chapters that we've all had together. His appeal is to unity through the whole book. What? Some of you said you were baptized by this one and that one. I thank God I didn't baptize very many of you except this one, that one, he says, back in early chapters. And some say I'm of Paul, some of Apollos. He said, but you're all in this thing together. And you hear it again in this chapter when he talks about baptism. He's talking about a shared experience for the believers. And that's why he alludes to this communion that we take in verse number 16 and 17. We have a cup of blessing. Isn't that sharing in the blood? And the bread which we eat, isn't it sharing in the body? Because we, being many, are one. So he's going to hit this unity thing early on. He's going to hit it again in chapter 10. He's going to hit it in chapters 12 and 13 and even 15. Unity is huge for the apostle. It's not just, okay, the boys over there who follow Apollos. They can be part of the Corinthian believers, but we have several of those different units. And if you don't like that one, the Presbyterian one, you can go to that one. That's the Anglican one. You don't like that one, go to the Baptist one. He doesn't have that at all. He would say, stop it, brothers. That's not the way you've learned Messiah. We're all one in this thing. So that's his appeal. Baptism means, therefore, united. As a result of being baptized, we all ate the same, verse 3, spiritual food. What's that? What's the spiritual food we ate?
The Word of God.
Good. The Word of God. Did we eat anything else? The same. Manna. Yeah, we ate the same food. But here the apostle calls it spiritual food.
Because it just came from heaven.
Good. Because we didn't work for it. We didn't plant it. We didn't go to the grocery store and purchase it. It came from God's Holy Spirit to us. It was a gift. It was a grace. So he calls it spiritual food. But I like what Orit says too, because right after we went through the sea and the cloud, what happened? We went to Mount Sinai and we got the same spiritual food in the Word of God. And I know Paul would say the Word is food. for us. So you can take it either way. Commentators argue about this one, and I'm not going to join them. Verse 4, he makes this very odd phrase, drank the same spiritual drink from a spiritual rock which followed them, and that was Messiah. Any reference point to that one?
Parable of what Jesus said, the house standing on the rock and the house standing on sand.
Okay, a house built on one of two elements. If you build a house on sand, it's not so smart. And if you build a house on rock, it's a firm foundation. That's good. And Paul has already used the idea of the foundation of the community of faith earlier in chapter 3, I think it was, and that Messiah is the foundation rock. Good. Okay. Other rock images you hear. The only sin, according to the scripture, Moses ever committed was hitting a rock. Is that a sin? It was a command, a disobedient. What was he supposed to do? Talk to the rock. Instead, he hit the rock. That was a sin? Okay, that's a sin. Why? Because it's disobedient. And disobedience is sin, whatever else we want to call it.
Some commentary
With the children of Israel, that's what
He was angry at God, and he was angry at the rock, and he was just plain angry that day. He was the agro-Moses. And so here's Moses, angry, hits the rock. Water does come out. As a result of his hitting the rock, what happens? What happens to him? He's prevented from entry in the promised land. Now that just seems ridiculous, doesn't it? I mean, come on, God. There's some big sins. That's a little sin. I mean, I don't even know. You really want to call that a sin, God? Let's just negotiate this, can't we? Don't we have a lawyer? Because that doesn't seem so bad. I mean, look at some of the sins. We're going to look at these in just a moment. Idolatry, fornication, grumbling. Is that in the same category? These are sins. Like hitting us, just a little tap. That's it? Yeah, that's it. When you think about it, every sin is punishable by the prevention of going into the promised land.
Perhaps Moses, of all people, was more holy than the rest, and being given the revelation of God like he had from face to face, he was on a higher scale, and therefore for him to strike the rock instead of talking to it was a greater sin than it was done by any other person. He was in a different category.
You'd expect more from him. He should know better. But he didn't. And all of us have opportunity, forks in the road, to follow or not follow God, to obey or not obey God. That's it. Whether you're the leader of the Jewish people or you're the newest member of the Jewish people, we all have responsibility to obey. And if we don't, there is consequence. And the consequence may seem unfair to say Moses can't go into the promised land, but that's not for you to decide. That's for God, who issued the command and can issue the consequence, the punishment. So they all drank from the rock, and we can talk about the beating of the rock, etc. There's lots. But the rock was Messiah. That is powerful to say that. Deuteronomy 32, he is the rock, his work is perfect, all his ways are justice, a God of truth without iniquity, just and right is he. That rock, according to Paul, is Messiah. Psalm 40, you've set my feet on a rock and established my goings. That rock is Messiah. Every time you read about the rock, you are reading about King Messiah in Older Testament. And if our people don't follow him or scandalized by him, will trip over him. The stumbling block, and that is certainly true. Nevertheless, verse 5, with most of them, God was not well pleased, for they were laid low in the wilderness. What a term. What does laid low mean? Laid low is a phrase that usually means, hey, let's kind of keep it on the QT. But that's not what he's saying. Laid low means leveled, killed. This is the harsh treatment of our people in those days. Katastronomai. It almost sounds catastrophic. Laid low. Catastrophe. It isn't. Sounds like it. Now, these things happened as examples, tupos, for us. The word tupos means types. A shadow of something else to come. A type. A figure of something else. Not only is it an example. Not only is it, you read that and you think, well, that could have happened. No, but it's a clear type that could have happened to us. So that the whole point of reading these things, when you and I read the Older Testament, these are examples to us so that we don't crave evil things. Really? What's another word for craving? Another word, coveting, the 10th commandment. If you covet really anything, but evil things for sure, then you're breaking Torah. And so he says, when you read Torah, it's designed to prevent you from breaking it. Well, that's good, sensible. So he gives 4 examples to us in verse 7, verse 8, verse 9, and verse 10. 4 things. What Jewish people did, again, good Bible references. Don't be idolaters. Again, that's a transliteration of the Greek word, idolatres, as some of them were. And the people sat down to eat and drink and stood up to play. That doesn't sound so bad. Eat, drink, play. Sounds like a normal 20-year-old, doesn't it? Eating, drinking, playing. Is it wrong? Well, what's the episode? What's this include? What's going on here in verse 7? Do you remember the allusion? Golden calf. Exodus 32. Well, that's certainly true. Exodus chapter 32, we read this as Aaron is kind of painted into the corner. Verse 1 says, "Now when the people saw that Moses delayed to come down from the mountain, the people assembled around Aaron and said, 'Come on, make us a god who will go before us, because Moses, this man who brought us out of Egypt, we don't know what became of him.' Aaron said, 'Okay, tear off the gold rings in the ears of your wives, your sons, your daughters, and bring them to me.' So the people tore off the gold rings, which were in their ears, brought them to Aaron. He took this from their hand, fashioned it with a graving tool, made it into a molten calf, and they said, 'This is your God, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt.' When Aaron saw this, he built an altar before it, and Aaron made a proclamation, said, 'Tomorrow's a feast to the Lord.'" Verse 6, "So the people the next day rose early, offered burnt offerings, brought peace offerings, sat down to eat and drink, and rose up to play." That's a direct quote that Paul is making here. And it's not just eating, and it's not just drinking, and it's not just playing, but it's worship. It's false worship. And so they brought wrong offerings to a God that they'd made instead of worshiping the true God who existed. Instead of being patient and waiting for Moses, instead of trusting in God, they trusted in what they could see physically with gold, etc. And their argument was, "Come on, Aaron, we don't know who this guy is who got us out of Egypt, so come on, fix it up. You're the boss. You're the boss's brother. He's gone. He's probably dead." How long was he up there? How long is 40 days? Like 6 weeks. He's gone. He's an 80-year-old guy. You watch an 80-year-old guy go up into the mountain and you think, I better come down soon. Maybe he's not coming back. And his brother was 83. So here they are told not to and to wait patiently, and they don't. So there's sin galore. When you read eat, drink, and play, don't read that wrong. Read it in context. Look, if I say, "For we are young and free," I'm quoting a whole poem, aren't I?
Yes.
And so it is here. He's quoting a whole section of Torah by saying the people rose up to eat and drink and rose up to play. He doesn't have to say the whole section. He's just saying, remember the golden calf. He could say that, but he's saying it by quote. All right. This was Egyptian sacrifice, and specifically in this letter, Paul uses Egyptian imagery and Canaanite imagery to say you're not going to go backwards and be like them, you're not going to go forwards and be like these guys. I want you to be unique. And there was, Egyptian gods. Okay, so that's number one. Don't be idolaters. The second warning is to not act immorally. The Greek pornuo. What does that sound like? Pornography, same word. Don't be pornographic. Don't act immorally or in fornication, some English translations say, as some of them did, and 23,000 fell in one day. And this we find in Numbers chapter 25. It says in verse 6, this is terrible. I guess I could start at verse 1. "While Israel remained at Shittim, the people began to play the harlot with the daughters of Moab." So the Shiksas around the corner were right there, and they invited the people to the sacrifices of their gods, and the people ate and bowed down to their gods. It always happens. When you go hang out with the pagans, you end up sacrificing to the gods of the pagans. So Israel joined themselves to Baal of Peor, Baal Peor, and the Lord was angry against Israel. Verse 6, "Then behold, one of the sons of Israel came, brought to his relatives a Midianite woman in the sight of Moses and the sight of the congregation, while they were weeping at the doorway of the Ohel Moed. Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron the priest, saw it, rose in the midst of the camp, took a spear in his hand, went after the men of Israel into the tent, pierced both of them through, the man of Israel and the woman. The plague on the sons of Israel was checked, but that day those who died by the plague, 24,000, because of sexual immorality." Wow. So, don't do that. And that's just a few out of the 3 million Jewish people. But remember, how many Jewish people older than 20 years old entered the Promised Land? Now, that's how many men left Egypt. 2, Joshua and Caleb. Only 2. So that means upwards of 600,000 men and probably another 1 million, say, women and older 20s, 30s, and whatnot. Most say around 2 million people were killed in the wilderness. Wow. So 24,000, it's just a drop in the bucket, but it's a drop. And it's a warning. It's a type to us of what not to enter into. Don't act immorally, because some of them did it, and you don't want to do it yourselves. Third is trying the Lord, or testing the Lord. Ekperazo, to test, to try the Lord, as some of them did, and were destroyed by the serpents. This is one that Yeshua uses in Numbers 21 to reference the cross. cross. In John chapter 3, Yeshua quotes this and says, in the same way Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, so must the Son of Man be lifted up. You've read that one in John 3. That's a story, a pericope of Numbers chapter 21. I'll just make quick mention of that. They set out from Mount Hor by way of the Red Sea, this is verse 4, to go around the land of Edom. People became impatient because of the journey, again, lacking in faith in God and disobeying the first commandment, which says, let God be God. The people spoke against Moses and God. Why'd you bring us out of Egypt to die in the wilderness? No water, no food. We hate this miserable food. And the Lord sent fiery serpents among the people, bit the people, many died. Here's the testing of God. They did the same at Meribah, and that's a quote again from the Psalms. So there's a constant, or regular anyway, noising off against God, and thousands and thousands and thousands of our people are killed in the wilderness. That's what the apostle is alluding to here. And don't grumble, as some of them did, and were destroyed by the destroyer. These are the 4 sins that he's picking on. He could have picked on lots of others. These are exemplary, not exhaustive. It's not the whole list of all the Jewish people's sins, either in the wilderness or in the time of Paul, but it is example or exemplary to us. These things, verse 11 of 1 Corinthians 10, happened to them as an example, or tupikos, as a type, and they were written for our instruction. So we get in on the benefit of reading the Older Testament so that we can be instructed and changed, affecting our lives. Therefore, 2 things, verse 12 and verse 13. Know both of these, you'll be good. Verse 12 says, don't be so high and mighty. Let him who thinks he stands take heed, lest he fall. You could have been like one of the Jewish folk back in the wilderness. This could have happened to you too. You could have grumbled. You could have been infected with the Midianite woman. Could have been an idolater and jumped around and played and worshiped. So let him who thinks he stands in Corinth today, in Sydney today, take heed lest he fall. Be on your guard and don't be any of these things. In light of what they did, don't get caught up in crowd Christianity, crowd religion. And then the second thing is, not only that warning of 12, but the encouragement of 13 is massive. No temptation has overcome you, but such as is common to man. And with that, and God is faithful, who will not allow you to be tempted beyond that which you are able, who, when the temptation comes, will provide a way of escape. One of those early verses I memorized, and I hope you do as well. No temptations hit you that isn't common to everybody else. You say, oh no, my world's really different. No, you don't understand. I am not only unique, I'm very unique. What would that mean? My situation is so different than anybody else. No, it isn't. I mean, you might have a name of a person that's unique, that's in your life, but we've all experienced or will experience common temptation. That's going to happen to all of us. The temptation to think we're the only one is maybe the first misunderstanding of the unity of the body of Messiah. No, all of these, grumbling, murmuring, testing the Lord, arguing with God in a real hostile way, all of these, we've all had it. We're going to have it. Our cousins are going to have it. Our grandchildren are going to have it. It doesn't mean we have to fall. In fact, that's the great encouragement of verse 13. God is faithful, who won't allow you, Corinthians, like he allowed the people of Israel to experience death. You're going to be better off. Why? Because we're one body. We're one in Messiah. And because we all drank from the same spiritual food, now we've got something better. Provide the way of escape so that you'll be able to endure it. Sometimes we have to flee. And that's what he says in verse 14. Flee from idolatry. In fact, I think the Greek is more shun idolatry than flee from it. But either way, don't worry about the verbiage. Just when something comes at you that's idolatrous, say, oh no, that's not for me. And in fact, you're better off. Honestly, you're better off if you verbalize it. If you say, I'm being tempted to idolatry. I think this would be so cool. I got a phone call the other day, and somebody who's really important asked me to do something right with them. And isn't that cool? And I could be next to a celebrity or an important person. Really? Does that really matter? You're saying to me, you're idolatrous. Stop that. That's of so little consequence in the world. I had a friend who said, love the little people. Love the little people. That's such a good way to say. Do the things on Cathedral Street with the homeless, over at the Oasis buildings of the Salvation Army on Crown Street. Go give yourself to people, and no one will notice. And you'll be fleeing from the idolatry of celebritism. Whatever it is, flee from any idolatry. I speak as to wise men. You judge what I say. And then he calls us to be one nation again. Now, the community of faith. One bread. We being many are one body. We're all partakers of the one bread. That's what he's saying in verse 17, saying, if we honestly take communion together, then we are a community. It's not just an individual taking a little piece of something. I had a gal come in the shop yesterday. I had two beautiful encounters in the shop yesterday. One, an Israeli named Tzipi, who saw the Yeshua, and she wanted to know, Ma Yeshua, what is Yeshua? And I said, Lo Ma, me. It's not what, it's a who. Who is Yeshua? So we had a great conversation. I got her details, and she really wants to unpack the issue of suffering. That's a hard one for her. Where was God when the 6 million died, and on and on. But this other lady came in, a Christian lady, lives not too far around the corner, who wanted to get some communion ware. She got some juice, she got a little cup, because she wants to get up in the morning and take communion by herself. Because she's learned from her study of the Bible that there is a grace that's given to her, strength that's given to her in the receiving of a piece of bread and a sip of juice, okay, in communion.
Can't do it by herself.
Well, see, that's what bothers me. Common. And so she's experiencing something that millions of others maybe at that same moment are experiencing. She's just doing it in the privacy of her room, which is, I suppose, okay. And it's faith anyway, isn't it? So it's not going to be wrong. I'm not her pastor. I'm not going to say, no, sweetheart, that doesn't work. Because that's her faith that allows her to enter into it. But I think, and God's with her, and so she's entering into covenant again with God. That's all good.
Jesus said, whenever you do it in remembrance of me.
Okay, and so I'm okay with her doing it, and it's irrelevant whether I'm okay with it or not for her sake, but I think it's a little less when you're private than when you're together and it's public.
When I meet my family on Friday night, none of them are believers, and we have the Kiddush, and I do my own communion.
You do it as if it's communion.
Yeah.
Okay, that, again, that's a faith thing for you, and it's positive, and it's healthy. There's nothing wrong with that. And that's your faith, and that's your expression of that faith, and it's a positive thing and healthy.
When I am doing Shabbat, I am doing entire Siddur by myself. My children are not always with me.
Of course. What I'm saying is I think these are exceptional and not the norm. The norm is, and we'll see it in chapter 11. We'll get to that. The idea of communion as community. That is normative, but don't feel bad if you do it privately. I just think it's less. Then he goes back to this issue of sharing at the altar and demons and can you eat or not eat. I mean, he's been pinging this every chapter since chapter 8. Why? What is it? It's all about whether you can eat food when you go to Joe Gentile's house. If you go to Joe Gentile's house, you've got to find out, is it food that was dedicated at the shrine of Buddha, or is it just something he got at the local meat market? That's all you have to do. So that's what he's doing. Verse 23, everything's legal, but not everything makes profit. All things are lawful, but not everything builds up. So let's do things that are better for other people. That's, again, what he's been saying several chapters. Don't seek your own good, but that of your neighbor. See, that makes sense, doesn't it? He uses a word in the word neighbor, verse 24, that we use in a different way. The Greek word is heteros, like heterosexual, not homosexual. So heteros means the other, and it's complementary, like a heterosexual couple, a couple of man and woman, which is normal. Shall we tell our member of parliament? That's normal. So he's saying here, when you're doing your thing, you're doing something homo that is for yourself, or auto, for yourself. But what you ought to be is serving the other and making a complement of this with each other. But then he says, now let's make sure we've got it for which conscience we're dealing with. I like this. Verse 25. Eat anything sold in the meat market. Don't ask questions for conscience sake, because God owns everything. Okay? Whose conscience? Good question. We'll get back to it. If one of the unbelievers invites you over to their house, you want to go, eat anything set before you. Don't ask questions for conscience sake. Whose conscience? The unbeliever's conscience. You don't want to stumble them. They've offered food to you. They're being generous to you. This is like when I go to Singapore. I just got back Tuesday. I have no idea what they brought to me a few times. The old Bible phrase to me is, shut up and eat it. They asked me, what do I eat? I told them regularly, I don't eat shellfish, I don't eat pork. And they were surprised when they brought prawns that I just kind of moved those around. Yeah. Oh, is prawns shellfish? Never mind. Pork. Is that like ham? So, you just move it away from the rice and you eat the rice. Don't worry about it. For their conscience sake. If anyone says to you, this is meat sacrificed to idols, verse 28, that you can't eat. Why? For their conscience sake. again, for the other person, so that you can help them understand, no, I'm not an idolater. Patty and I went to Thailand, and we hired a tour guide lady for the day. It was kind of neat. And she's showing us this Buddhist temple and this Buddhist temple, and after about the 5th Buddhist temple, we said, we've probably seen enough temples thing. But at one, she wanted us to do the shaking and the throwing and the lucky and all that, and I said, no, I'm really not going to do that. Oh, it's nothing. And I said, if it's nothing, then you shouldn't mind that I'm not going to do that. And one lady, I was standing out front of a pagan temple in Singapore last week, and one Christian lady was right there giving it to the girl who was inviting her in. I didn't know either of these people, but she was saying, if it's luck, don't make me pay for it. And God doesn't need my luck, and God is... she was all over this woman, but I thought, so that's a good line. Here's a little stick, and you shake it like a lulav, it looked like, the way they were doing it. And, you bow, and you kneel, and you do this, and then you rub the belly or the foot of the Buddha, and it's just luck. No, it's paganism.
In Singapore, there was a church of St. Paul and St. Peter. There was a big, huge statue of St. Paul, and on his foot was golden. They painted golden. And they said, whenever you go in, you've got to kiss the foot. Now, isn't that idolatry?
It is exactly wrong. Paul would have said, don't you dare do that. And Peter would have said that in Acts chapter 10 when he walked into Cornelius' house, and Cornelius bowed down. He said, get up. I'm a man just like you. So he makes it clear in verse 29, I mean not your own conscience, but the other man's. This is the point. When you are understanding the grace of God extended to you, you will be kind to others. You'll be living for their sake. So if they say, would you like some lunch? You say, yeah, thanks. And if they say, would you like some lunch? I offered this to the Buddha. You say, yeah, no. So you listen to what they say. It's not just the lunch. It's what their intention was. And you want to serve their conscience. So whatever you do, eating, drinking, verse 31, whatever you do it to the glory of God. Don't give anybody an offense. Just as I also please all men in all things. He'd already said that to the Jew. I became a Jew. To those under the law is under the law. Chapter 9. Not seeking my own profit, but I want everybody to be profited that they might be saved. The whole point of all this teaching is to guard you from idolatry and to let you serve other people. How good is that? I think it's great. He's a good teacher. Paul laid it out nice and neat for us. Don't seek your own good, but that of the heteros, that of your neighbor.
You've been listening to the Bible class of Jews for Jesus in Australia. For more information, contact Jews for Jesus, Post Office Box 925, Sydney, Australia 2001. God bless you.